upon a time, the tales that we know and love, stories of magical lands, heroic journeys, and happily ever afters, were not so innocent. Beneath the charming veneer of Disney adaptations and bedtime stories lies a shadowy past filled with gruesome punishments, twisted morality, and chilling lessons. In this video, let's journey back to the origins of these iconic stories to uncover their macabre beginnings, from the haunting sacrifices of the Little Mermaid to the brutal justice of Cinderella. These tales were not crafted merely for entertainment, but to serve as stark moral warnings for a world far removed from the innocence of childhood. Discover how Carlo Collodi's Pinocchio was more about punishment than redemption, and how Hans Christian Andersen's Mermaid dissolved into despair instead of triumph, and why the Brothers Grimm's Snow White is anything but a sweet fairy tale. These stories reflect the harsh realities and fears of their time, their darkness meant to teach as much as to terrify. Through expert analysis, artistic reconstructions, and deep dives into historical context, we explore how these tales transform from grim morality plays into the sanitized, universally cherished myths of today. Join us as we unravel the threads of human nature, fear, and hope, woven into these timeless narratives. Because behind every magical kingdom and enchanted forest lies a history that is anything but a fairy tale. When most people think of the Tin Man, they picture a shiny, heart-sinking companion from the 1939 film, The Wizard of Oz. A friendly figure whose rusting tears and gentle demeanor endear him to audiences. However, the original story of the Tin Man, as conceived by L. Frank Baum in his seminal 1900 novel, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, reveals a far more sinister and unsettling origin. Beneath the polished surface of the Tin Woodsman lies a tale of mutilation, witchcraft, and existential dread that transforms this beloved character into a symbol of human fragility and the consequences of magical interference. Once a human named Nick Chopper, his story begins with an innocent and tender love for a munchkin girl, Nimmy Amy. This romance, however, sets in motion a series of tragic events, culminate in the destruction of Nick's body, piece by piece. Each severed limb is replaced with tin prosthetics by a reclusive tinsmith named Coo Clip, until nothing of his original human form remains. Nick Chopper is left without a heart, not just physically, but emotionally, as he loses the ability to love the woman that he once desired to marry. The Tin Man's backstory is one of gradual dismemberment at the hands of a cursed axe, enchanted by the wicked witch of the East. Nimmy, the munchkin that he was in love with, was the maid of the wicked witch of the East. Their love provoked the witch, who saw Nimmy as her servant, and she was determined to prevent her from leaving. To ensure that the couple would never wed, the witch cursed Nick Chopper's axe, setting in motion a chain of events both grotesque and heartbreaking. The enchanted axe was once an ordinary tool of the trade, and it suddenly became a weapon of self-destruction. As Nick carried out his daily labor in the forest, his axe, compelled by dark magic, began to betray him. With each swing, it turned against its wielder, severing a limb or damaging a body part. In his desperation, Nick sought help from Coo Clip, a tinsmith who lived deep in the woods of Oz. Coo Clip, with his craftsman's skill, replaced Nick's missing limbs with tin, little by little. Eventually, Nick's whole body was replaced with tin, culminating in the removal of his torso and head. In the end, Nick Chopper was no longer a man, but a machine, a tin woodsman whose original body had been completely erased. This transformation came at a terrible cost. While the tin body did allow Nick to survive, it rendered him heartless, both literally and figuratively. Without a heart, Nick lost his capacity for love. The feelings that he once cherished for Nimmy had disappeared, leaving him cold and hollow. And though his body was unbreakable, his soul was deeply wounded. Stripped of his humanity, Nick Chopper became a tragic figure, wandering the forest of Oz, until rust immobilized him entirely. Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid, 1837, is a haunting and melancholic tale, vastly different from the cheerful Disney adaptation that many are familiar with. At its core, the original story explores themes of unrequited love, sacrifice, and the pain of longing for something unattainable. The story's darker elements reflect Andersen's signature style of blending beauty with tragedy. The Little Mermaid, the youngest of 6 sisters, lives under the sea with her family. She is fascinated by the human world, and she yearns to experience it. At the age of 15, she's allowed to surface and witness a ship carrying a handsome prince. She saves the prince from drowning during a storm and falls deeply in love with him, though he remains unaware of her identity. Unlike Disney's version, where Ariel is motivated by curiosity and a love of adventure, Andersen's mermaid is driven by a spiritual longing. She desires not only to be with the prince, but also to gain an immortal soul, which humans possess but mermaids don't. In the original, a mermaid's life ends when she dies, as she dissolves into sea foam, whereas humans ascend to the afterlife. Determined to win the prince's love and earn an immortal soul, the Little Mermaid visits the Sea Witch, a sinister and powerful figure. The witch agrees to grant her legs so that she can live among the humans, but she does warn her of the consequences. The transformation will be excruciating, as every step the mermaid takes will feel like walking on sharp knives, and she will be unable to return to the sea. The price that she must pay for the spell is her voice, specifically her beautiful singing voice, the most cherished part of her identity. Mute and in constant pain, the mermaid sacrifices everything for the slim chance of winning the prince's heart. The Little Mermaid joins the human world and captivates the prince with her beauty and grace, but she cannot speak to him. Despite all her efforts, the prince sees her only as a friend, and he quickly falls in love with another woman, believing that she was the one who saved him from drowning. The mermaid watches helplessly as he marries this woman, shattering her dreams. The mermaid's sisters, desperate to save her, they strike a deal with the Sea Witch. They give up their hair in exchange for a knife. If the mermaid kills the prince and lets his blood spill on her feet, she can return to the sea and live as a mermaid again. Faced with this choice, the Little Mermaid cannot bring herself to harm the man she loves. Instead, she throws the knife into the sea and prepares to dissolve into foam at sunrise. As the first light of dawn breaks, the mermaid doesn't vanish entirely. Instead, she is transformed into a spirit, a daughter of the air, granted a chance to earn an immortal soul by performing good deeds for 300 years. Though she lost her love and her life as a mermaid, she gains a sense of spiritual redemption. Andersen's tale is not just a love story, but a profound exploration of sacrifice and longing. The mermaid's transformation and suffering symbolize the pain of pursuing the unattainable, whether it's love or a higher spiritual state. Unlike the Disney's triumphant ending, Andersen's story leaves readers with a poignant reminder of the cost of selflessness and the complexity of human desire. Disney's 1989 version of The Little Mermaid replaced the tragedy with a happy ending, where Ariel marries Prince Eric after defeating Ursula, the Sea Witch, and the story becomes one of youthful optimism and triumph over adversity. This shift reflects a broader trend in modern retellings to emphasize hope and empowerment, steering away from the original somber and reflective tone. Anderson's version, however, remains a testament to the enduring power of bittersweet storytelling, where beauty and sorrow intertwine in an unforgettable way. It serves as a stark contrast to the Disney film tale, offering a deeper, more introspective perspective on love and sacrifice in the human condition. The tale of Cinderella, in its earliest forms, is much darker and more gruesome than the familiar Disney version. The most well-known early versions are Charles Perrault's Cinderella, 1697, and the Brothers Grimm, Ashen Patel, 1812, though even these sanitized earlier folk stories with deeply macabre elements. Let's explore the chilling details of the original versions, especially the Grimm adaptation. In the Brothers Grimm version, Cinderella's story begins with the death of her mother, who, on her deathbed, instructs Cinderella to remain kind and good, promising that she will look down on her from heaven. Her father remarries, bringing a cruel stepmother and two wicked stepsisters into the household. Cinderella is reduced to servitude, wearing rags and living in ashes, hence the nickname Ashen Patel, Ash Girl. Her grief and isolation are essential to the story's dark tones, with her suffering amplified by her family's cruel treatment. Unlike in the Perrault version, where Cinderella's father is absent or passive, in the Grimm's tale, he is just complicit in her mistreatment. Instead of a fairy godmother, Cinderella receives help from a magical tree growing on her mother's grave. She waters it with her tears, and over time, a white bird, possibly her mother's spirit, begins granting her wishes. This connection to her deceased mother introduces an eerie supernatural element to the story. When the prince announces a 3-day festival to find a bride, Cinderella asks the bird for beautiful dresses and shoes, which it provides. The dresses shine with gold and silver, making her unrecognizable to her family. During the ball, the prince becomes infatuated with Cinderella, but he can't discover her identity. Unlike in modern retellings, Cinderella doesn't leave a glass slipper behind intentionally. Instead, she flees because she doesn't want her family to recognize her. On the third night of the ball, the prince devises a trap to catch her. He smears the palace stairs with pitch, a very sticky substance, causing her golden shoe to stick as she runs away. The most infamous and macabre part of the Brothers Grimm version lies in the fitting of the golden shoe. When the prince visits Cinderella's house, her stepsisters are desperate to win over his favor, resorting to mutilating their feet. The oldest sister even cutting off her toes to fit into the shoe. The prince, initially fooled, rides away with her. However, the magical bird warns him of the blood dripping from her foot. Horrified, he returns her to the house. The second oldest sister slices off her heel to fit into the shoe. Again, the bird alerts the prince to the deception, and she too is rejected. Finally, Cinderella tries on the shoe, which fits perfectly. The prince recognizes her as the mysterious woman from the ball, and they leave together. At Cinderella's wedding, the magical bird exacts brutal revenge on the stepsisters. As they attempt to ingratiate themselves with Cinderella and the prince, the birds peck out their eyes, leaving them blind for the rest of their lives. This ending serves as a stark and violent form of justice, emphasizing the consequences of their cruel and deceit. The Brothers Grimm version of Cinderella is far more concerned with morality than romance. Themes of suffering, justice, and divine retribution dominate the tale. Cinderella's eventual triumph is not just a reward for her beauty and her charm, but for her unwavering kindness and her patience despite immense hardship. The mutilation and blinding of the stepsisters underscore the story's grim warning. Cruelty and deceit will be punished, often in horrifying ways. This reflects the harsh moral lessons of the time, where fairy tales were intended to teach obedience and virtue, rather than merely just entertain. J. M. Barrie's Peter Pan, first introduced in his 1902 novel, The Little White Bird, and it expanded into the 1904 play, Peter Pan, or The Boy Who Wouldn't Grow Up, and the 1911 novel, Peter and Wendy, has delighted audiences for over a century. However, beneath the whimsical adventures and the childlike wonder lies a darker, more unsettling tale filled with themes of loss, death, and the harsh realities of growing up. Peter Pan is not merely a carefree boy who refuses to grow up. His origins are steeped in tragedy. In The Little White Bird, Barrie explains that Peter was once a human infant who escaped from his nursery window and flew to Kensington Gardens. Believing that his mother would always leave the window open for him, Peter eventually returns home, only to find it closed, and his mother with another child. This initial abandonment underscores Peter's eternal refusal to grow up, as he associates adulthood with heartbreak and rejection. Peter's perpetual youth is less a joyous celebration of childhood and more a tragic inability to cope with change or responsibility. He chooses to remain forever in Neverland, where he is free of adult consequences but also perpetually isolated. Peter is not the heroic figure of modern adaptations. In Barrie's original works, Peter is portrayed as selfish, callous, and disturbingly indifferent to the lives of others. He kidnaps children from their homes to bring them to Neverland, where they serve as his companions, the Lost Boys. However, if these boys grow up or disobey him, Peter kills or banishes them. As Barrie wrote, the boys on the island vary, of course, in numbers, according as they get killed and so on. And when they seem to be growing up, which is against the rules, Peter thins them out. This dark characterization reveals Peter as a tyrant, ruling Neverland with a childlike disregard for morality and life. While Neverland is often depicted as a magical and exciting place, it is also a realm of constant danger and violence. Pirates, wild animals, and hostile mermaids pose threats, and death is a frequent occurrence. Peter himself seems unfazed by the violence, often forgetting those who die in the battles that he orchestrates. His lack of memory and care further emphasizes his detachment from reality and his inability to empathize with others. Peter's relationships are fraught with manipulation and tragedy. Wendy, whom Peter brings to Neverland as a surrogate mother for the Lost Boys, eventually grows up and leaves him. In Barrie's original story, Peter returns years later to find Wendy an adult with a daughter named Jane. Peter takes Jane to Neverland, and this cycle repeats with Jane's daughter, Margaret. This endless cycle underscores Peter's stagnation and inability to accept change, while those that he loves inevitably grow up and leave him behind. In some interpretations, it's suggested that Peter is a symbol of death, leading children to Neverland, a metaphor for the afterlife. His kidnapping of children and the mortality of the Lost Boys support this interpretation. Captain Hook, Peter's nemesis, is more than just a villain. He represents the adult world that Peter fears and rejects. Hook's obsession with defeating Peter stems from a deep resentment of his own lost youth and the inevitability of aging. His tragic death at the hands of the crocodile serves as a grim reminder of the fleeting nature of life and the inevitability of time. Throughout Barrie's work, there are constant reminders of death and impermanence. Peter himself is described as a boy who thins out the lost boys and forgets about those who are no longer useful to him. Even the whimsical idea of second star to the right and straight on till morning is tinged with melancholy, as it suggests a journey into the unknown, a metaphor for death. Disney's 1953 animated film, Peter Pan, and other adaptations have significantly softened the darker aspects of Barrie's story. Peter is portrayed as a playful and heroic figure, and the violence and tragedy of Neverland are downplayed. The Lost Boys' deaths are omitted, and Peter's manipulative tendencies are replaced with charm and humor. However, some adaptations, such as the 2003 live-action Peter Pan or the novel Peter Pan in Scarlet by Geraldine McCrogan, attempt to balance whimsy with Barrie's darker themes. The original Peter Pan is far more complex and unsettling than its modern interpretations. It is a story about the fear of growing up, the consequences of eternal youth, and the inevitability of loss and death. Beneath its fantastical surface lies a cautionary tale, reminding us of the dangers of clinging to childhood at the expense of growth and connection. Far from the joyful escapades of Disney's Peter, Barrie's original creation is both a celebration and a haunting critique of the innocence and selflessness of youth. The story of Snow White has its origins in European folklore, with its most famous version being the Grimm brothers' Sneeuwwitchen, Little Snow White, published in their Children's and Household Tales, 1812. However, surprise, surprise, this version is far darker and more violent than Disney's sanitized 1937 adaptation. It's a tale filled with jealousy, gruesome punishments, and sinister themes that reflect the grim reality of its time. The story begins similarly to the modern version. Queen pricks her finger while sewing by a snow-filled window and wishes for a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as ebony. He gives birth to Snow White, but dies shortly after. King remarries a vain and cruel woman obsessed with her beauty. This new queen possesses a magic mirror, which tells her that she is the fairest of them all, until Snow White grows up and surpasses her beauty. Consumed by jealousy, the queen decides that Snow White must die. The queen orders a huntsman to take Snow White into the forest, kill her, and bring back her lungs and liver as proof. The huntsman, moved by the girl's innocence and beauty, spares her and kills a boar instead. He presents the boar's lungs and liver to the queen, who eats them, believing that they belong to Snow White. This act of cannibalism highlights the queen's monstrous cruelty. Snow White finds refuge in the house of 7 dwarfs who work in the mountains mining precious metals. They agree to let her stay in exchange for her keeping their house in order. They warn her to beware of her stepmother, who eventually discovers through the mirror that Snow White is still alive. Unlike the Disney film, the queen does not rely solely on the poisoned apple to kill Snow White. She tries to murder her 3 times. The first being the queen disguises herself as an old peddler and offers Snow White a beautiful lace bodice. Once Snow White tries it on, the queen pulls the lace so tight that Snow White cannot breathe and collapses. The dwarfs return in time to revive her. The second time, the queen returns, this time disguised as a different woman, offering a comb soaked in poison. When Snow White uses the comb, she falls unconscious. The dwarfs again save her by removing the comb. And finally, the queen uses the iconic poisoned apple. She crafts one side of the apple to be deadly, while the other side harmless. Convince Snow White that it's safe, The queen eats from the harmless side. Snow White takes a bite of the poison half and collapses, appearing dead. This time the dwarfs cannot revive her, and they place her in a glass coffin. In the Grimm's version, Snow White isn't awakened by true love's kiss. Instead, a prince happens upon her coffin in the forest, and he is so captivated by her beauty that he demands the dwarfs give it to him. As the servants carry the coffin away, they trip, causing the poisoned apple piece to dislodge from Snow White's throat. She wakes up, and the prince immediately proposes marriage. At Snow White's wedding, the queen asks her mirror who is the fairest, expecting no rivals. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Not you. Mirror informs her that the new queen, Snow White, is the fairest. Enraged, she attends the wedding, only to face a horrifying fate. She is forced to wear red-hot iron shoes and dance in them until she collapses and dies. This violent punishment serves as a moral lesson typical of many Grimm tales. Jealousy and vanity. The stepmother's obsession with beauty and youth reflects societal pressures, with a brutal warning about the dangers of envy. Cannibalism. The queen's consumption of what she believes to be Snow White's organs is a shocking and grotesque act, showcasing her inhumane cruelty. Survival and innocence. Snow White's naivety almost leads to her death multiple times, but her innate goodness ultimately saves her. Violent justice. The queen's gruesome punishment emphasizes the Grimm's beliefs in retributive justice. That's what I call justice. As we conclude our journey through the dark origins of the world's most beloved fairy tales, one truth becomes hauntingly clear. These stories were never meant to be simple bedtime tales. Behind the sugar-coated versions that we know today lie cautionary fables steeped in fear, loss, and rawness of human nature. Sometimes it is in the darkest stories that we find the brightest truth. Did you guys know any of these dark origins? I'm very surprised by the Tin Man original story. It's very dark. There is so many more tales with dark origins, but I only named a few of my favorite. I really loved the Tin Man one. What is your favorite version? Is it the original or the dark? I love dark tales, I do. But as a child, I know that I would rather hear the Disney's version. The dark ones seem kind of traumatizing to kids, for sure. I mean, I was kind of traumatized. But it shows not only has storytelling changed over time, but times have drastically changed and softened. Kids had to grow up quickly hearing all these dark things. Our grandmas and beyond generations were very tough cookies. We were taught and disciplined way softer than they were. We live in a sugar-coated world today. But I'm thankful for that. Children should be children for as long as they can. So thank you all for watching this episode of Tales Told in the Dark. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.